So we've just had the festival of Achalanatha Bodhisattva, which I think, let me just take a rain check on how many people have been coming for a while and already kind of know a bit about the background of the Bodhisattvas and our tradition. Is there anybody who's not familiar with any of that, or are you all somewhat familiar? I think it sounds like you're probably mostly familiar. Is that right? Yes. So let's take as read the sort of general background. So it's interesting that when I was thinking about which ceremony to do today, before the war broke out actually in Ukraine, I just had the sense that, you know, where we all were somehow was all about the need to really ground ourselves in what is fundamental. And so that ceremony seemed to be the most appropriate one for that reason. And I guess what comes for us when we do, as we all are, by coming here in a way wishing to see what is true and what is real, what it seems like, almost like a hand in a glove, what goes with that is going to be the arising of quite strong sort of fear in the form of a resistances or various sort of dis-eases of senses of things. And if we don't have enough of that already, just opening our laptops and seeing the news every day, which, you know, is fairly distressing, and of course. But I guess in being in a Buddhist monastery, we're really trying to take all of what we experience as the reality of the world playing out in front of our eyes and turn it all back into what is it that causes all this to kick off to begin with. And it sounds very simple in a way to say that, and it sounds almost naive, but I guess the point of what we're doing when we're looking at these different elements, like Achalanatha as a bodhisattva, who actually isn't separate from Kanzeon, the compassionate one that we think of as being, you know, the dispeller of difficulties through the pure, beautiful compassion of kindness. But Achalanatha's kindness is an appropriate kindness for the sort of experience that many of us find as human beings, which is that we are quite bullheaded and get entrenched, and we cannot see clearly because we get entrenched in our position, relatively speaking, to somebody else or something else. And of course, for all of us, we have a sense of our own natural boundaries and what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate, and the sense of, you know, decorum in that sense. But of course, when it comes to, as we all have, relationships, we find it's a much more sort of thick, smoggy area that we're dealing with. And so in many ways, I think what we have now in our practice as Buddhists is a lot of usefulness from the last 100, 200 years, with the whole understanding more of the manner in which the mind works and creates an idea that it projects out onto an other, and that whole psychotherapeutic direction. And I think that's extremely useful for personally, because in essence it's pointing us back at the fact that, well, where does the war really start? Where do the difficulties that we have, or the decisions that we need to make, what are those conflicts or tensions or stresses? What really is that about? And in short form, I would say for myself, it's about some latent sense of me as an identity, a self-consciousness of my own sense of me as me. And of course, that includes then naturally a sense of what is not me. So there's a dependency between being a me and knowing a not me. And this is really looking into the kind of core sense of how the Buddha expressed things, which was very much, at least in some of his teachings, around the whole idea of dependent co-arising. And I'm sure many of you recently have been reminded of this teaching, because if you're like me on your computer, you'll have probably been getting feeds from some of Thich Nhat Hanh's talks, because he died recently. And it's really wonderful to read his teachings again, because I wouldn't have necessarily picked up the book myself, or gone out of my way to find it. So having something suddenly land in my inbox, and I sort of did do the thing that we're not supposed to do of getting distracted and pressing the go button and reading it. It was actually, in one case, very valuable, because he's really talking in many ways, as many of you know, about how we, as he calls it, inter-being or inter-are. So we're not separate. We're always a sort of combination of things going on. And so that sense in which we're always experiencing ourselves essentially only in relation to some other thing that gives us a benchmark or some sort of a sense of who we are in relation to. And I think from a point of view personally, and I can only speak from my personal sense, this has been a tremendously useful thing for me to let myself work around. Really effectively, it's a concept, it's a construct in the Buddha's teaching, if you like, but it seems to mirror quite a degree of the reality of how then we put together being me, and we're only me in relation to. So that being so, we can see that this little phrase that we have in one of our scriptures where we say depending and yet non-depending both is very telling, and it's quite a kind of phrase that I find that worms into me, and I'm kind of feeling, well, what is the non-depending? What is that? Because I can see and sense that were I not to have eaten breakfast this morning, were I not to have done a lot of other things, I would not, well, I might be still here if I had eaten breakfast, but you know what I mean. A lot of things have come together for this moment to be this moment as it is. And any number of things that might not have happened, say if Jenny's car had broken down, except that she probably walked, but that was a bad image, but, somebody's car's broken down, so they don't come. But you're here because your car worked. And how did your car work? Because you got it to the MOT, last week, or, you know what I mean? There's a whole slew of things going on, and it's mind-boggling in that sense. So now we're here, we actually have the teaching of the Buddha, which is also then mind-boggling in the sense that he's then saying in the traditional teachings a lot about how all the different elements that go to make up a sense of me have to come together to then give us a sense that this is me here. And the key, of course, element in being me is the consciousness sense that I exist, that I am here, which has been sort of generated out of a sort of apparent lot of other little bits and pieces that have all managed to, as it were, wire themselves together so that we've got a circuit that makes it feel like, well, I'm existent and I sit here and I'm this and this is me. And then we obviously tend to carry that on through our lives, and so when we bump into things we don't feel too happy if they're antithetical to us, if that's the right word. So you get the drift, and I think I can't do too much in a detailed way about all that. So I guess this non-depending question is really, I think, what Achalanatha is pointing us to, and the image that's used may well have come from very, very early Buddhist times, and it seems like there was an evolution of how in apparently the early stages of Buddhism, or the original teachings of the Buddha, you had the Pali texts and you have the teachings on compassion, mindfulness, and the Buddha, as far as we know, does not get into the idea of Achalanatha, fierce and stuff to drive you. And apparently what happened later on was that people felt that it was all a bit long term and they weren't really making headway very quickly. So there developed these sort of more forceful and dramatic images to sort of help to get people to sort of snap out of it, if you like, and big sword that will sort of make you sort of jump to enlightenment, as it were. I mean, I'm putting it in my own parochial way, but you get the drift. And it's quite intriguing, because that sense always that we have in the background is often, have I made it, have I not made it? And so we find sort of ways and means to try to find kind of the step forward, the next move, the next thing to do. But then, of course, as we were saying at the beginning, the turning back of all of the mind's conscious ramblings and creations about me being successful, unsuccessful, failure, whatever it is, things that we all think about ourselves and others, to turn all that back and look at put the searchlight on that to see, well, actually, how does that really exist? In what way is this sense of being me actually something I can verify and rely upon in some way? And so that's the deep meditative inquiry that we mentioned that Reverend Master's offertory for this festival spoke of, or just simply that phrase of Achalanatha embodying that. But Achalanatha, just to give you that little background, has come out of the need to help people with images of how to, as it were, find their way in training. And many of you are familiar probably with some of the old scriptures that talk about the various stages of a bodhisattva. And the Akala Akala stage, which is the 8th of the 10th stages, is the stage of complete steadfast stillness, absolutely immovability, and it's called the stage of immovability. And it's very telling, because this stage is where, according to the tradition of the Yogacara tradition, which sees things in a sort of more analytic way, this stage is where all the normal provocations for us that would come mentally, that would keep on wanting to make us generate an experience of being me, those all get turned on a dime into the pure mirror wisdom, which just simply reflects. And the key point of this is that, and I find even just hearing this, if you like, as a kind of little fairy story, even the little fairy story actually, in a way, albeit a conceptual story, nevertheless sort of points at something that intuitively we kind of have some flickering sense of. So forgive me for giving you this, in quotes, what could be a fairy story for those of us who are nowhere near the 8th bhumi in Buddhism, and sure as heck I know I'm not anyway in normal sense. But the description of it goes that, without giving you too long a talk, how long have we got? We've got the whole thing of how do we create and recreate our own suffering out of whatever we perceive. And so there is, of course, many of you know this already, the tradition which talks about how various parts of the mind is divided up into parts, and we have a kind of deep memory which they call the seed store consciousness, which has all these potential seeds that can get re-watered and sprout as a result of something that comes in the present that triggers a past memory. And so much of our suffering, if we reflect on it, we can see there is a truth in that sort of diagram or idea. And then, interestingly, there's another aspect which I think we all know very well in ourselves, which is, if you like, the part that it is absolutely going to fight its corner to the death, in the sense of, don't you dare step on my foot, that sort of sense of self-defensiveness. If something provokes it, it will absolutely, go and be self-destructive in trying to defend its position. And in one sense, it can look, from a societal point of view, looking at that situation at the moment, that can look incredibly courageous and brave. But there's another aspect to it, which is almost a kind of blindness, a real blindness, that somehow anybody could win a war fundamentally. And I don't want to get into politics, but from a deeper point of view, no war can ever be won in that way. And we all realise on some level that that's true. So the key point of this stage of the Bodhisattva is that they have gone on, through the process of seeing and looking into the point where the place that's called Manus, which is the sort of part of the consciousness that wants to keep, as it were, interacting with the seeds to make it feel like it's happening to a me, that finally gets dissolved. And so the seeds still arise, but they're not going to interact or bump into the fertile ground that can then give them the chance to sprout. So that's why this Achalanatha Bodhisattva is very, very powerful, because it has absolutely no sense anymore of a sense of an individual self left. So in that sense, it's a true Bodhisattva, because it cannot do anything for its own self-determination, because it's not a self, it's not got any of that structure of a sense of a self. So when we see that fierce image, it's nothing to do with somebody being angry or wanting to destroy. It's got nothing to do with that mindset. It's absolutely everything to do with, and that's why in the offertory, in the dedication, I use the idea of the mirror, that actually it's the beautiful, pure mirror that we then see what we are doing in when we experience the encounters with our life, with our friends, with our families, with any of the situations we come into. If we have the eye to see it, we actually encounter our own mind, if you like, in the experiences of daily life. So when he talks about the mindfulness, it is actually, can we, in a way, deeply relax all of our torso, all of our being, in such a way that we can then actually receive what we are experiencing, rather than, as many of us do, through tensing up, protecting and defending ourselves from what actually is happening. And if we can just relax, then we can actually even allow the unallowable to be seen, or what we feel frightened to allow to be seen. And it's very telling that the iconographic aspect of Achalanatha, as we learned as young novices here, is all about apparently vibrant flames and, fangs going up and down and all this. But underneath there is a youthful, soft, simple body that's standing there with no, if you like, in quotes, attitude. It's just a soft kind of body. It's not like this, I'm a self-oriented body that's sort of defending. It's actually a very soft body. And you see, if you look carefully at depictions in Japanese art and things, you can see that element there clearly once you know to look for it. And isn't that interesting? Because that blue body is actually the meditation. It's gone beyond the sense of a me. So I hope in a way that what I'm doing is using a description to sort of both ignite, in a sense, our somewhat of our intuition about this that is. And it's never going to be accessible through our sort of, in a way, figuring it out sort of mind, but we just get that sense of what sitting is, and we can't put that into words. It's almost like a knowing before we can say a word or know a word or express anything. And it's not therefore foreign to us. In fact, it's more like the primordial, if we use that image, a primordial basis that we all are and sit in. And then, as it were, all these other layers of Manus and the seed store consciousness, Manus, and all these sixth, seventh consciousnesses and things that we talk about in that form of the Yogacara description, if you like, that's all built by, the very mind that actually that can be dropped away into directly Zazen. So that's why, in many ways, we don't get into a lot of conceptual things, because in a way, when we do our particular form of practice, we are just going straight to the root. And that's what I was going to say, Nagarjuna, forgive me, it's easy, comes out of my mouth. That's what Achalanatha is pointing us to. So I think at this point, there's many, many things I could, go into, but I guess it's that dedication to look for the true security, and, or if you like, look for our true heart's wish, actually sometimes within the very danger that we would want to run away from. Because if we can look and see with that eye, and gradually gentle ourselves to be able to sit there and let it be what it expresses, it's not got the fierce flames that we think, and our imaginary sense of who we are has a chance to be allowed to just be seen through in a moment, and less than a moment, and we, and I think what I'd like to finish with is just that key aspect of the significance that we have, actually, and I did mean to bring it and I didn't, but Reverend Master Jiu's commentary on the first precept, cease from evil, where she says, don't fear the past, fear the future, live now without evil. And what she's pointing to sounds so simple, and yet it's taking us our whole lives to actually keep, as it were, letting the past burn up, so that now we can actually take whatever the step seems to be now, without a tie to, oh my gosh, if I do this, what will happen with that? And we all have that sense in our minds often of, fear of what would happen if, and we project a sort of what if scenario. And then we are literally, our fear is driving our life, because we're constantly, and we're all doing this a lot, and me included, we're kind of trying to play the game of kind of, well, I can sort of half not look at the fear and half think what I need to do, and then, and there's this sort of thing going on. Are you familiar with that by any chance? I think I am. And sometimes there are those moments in life where, we have that chance to sort of stop and soberly reflect on things, and dare to look in the eye of that Achalanatha, because he goes like this, and he's sort of got one fang up and one fang down, and you wouldn't want to meet him on a dark night, but actually could we find that if we met him on a dark night, he's our greatest friend we ever met, because he's going to hold that mirror up, he's not going to let us get away with it, and we can then see that what we were fearful of was all one big mirage of what we feel ourselves to be, that's all this dependent stuff. I'm dependent on what I see for how I feel. I'm dependent on what I think as a result of what my neighbour said to me 2 minutes ago, and all of these dependencies. So what is that scripture saying when it says non-depending, depending and yet non-depending both? What is that? And isn't this a fantastic opportunity that the human race has? Because if we're not going to sit here and see the news now and wonder, where is that war? Where does that war start? Because I've seen it in myself. I hate to say this, but I think I know which side I'm on. That is bad news, because actually there is no side to be on. And yet, as a human being, I can be very clear as a human being that, oh yes, the good guys and those bad guys. And that's, I'm quite honestly true. That is what comes up. And okay, I've got, a particular home background that might precipitate that tendency in me. But I think we can all probably relate to that. That is so simple, what happens to us the minute we open our laptops and see it. And yet, we find it so hard to desist from going down that road. Or we project it in a different way, or we squirrel around. Whereas if we could just say, okay, let me see, if our prayer and our vow could be what Achalanatha says, which is let me see, without trying to go anywhere or do anything, which is the immovability of Achalanatha. We will not have anything that we can hold up as success. We won't have anything that we can denounce as failure. All those dreamlike illusions that we live in most of the time and have a currency of communication in those ways are absolutely flawed. There's no place where that actually exists other than what I'm thinking in my little head, or what I feel I'm feeling in my body that then goes back into my head and creates another go-round of the thing, because the chemicals take 90 seconds once they kick off the cortisol, and you're off for 90 seconds on that spin. But usually most of us take a lot longer than 90 seconds for the cortisol to drain through and be back to zero, because we start replaying it again. And, so again, we have this wonderful help with some of these things like the neuroscience and these things too. So I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but I guess it's to leave us all with the sense that we cannot ever put an image on what we think reality is. We can never project an image. And one of the things for me is the sense, for example, that I do not feel I am a very determined person. But if I was to try to be determined, as like Achalanatha, that would be ridiculous, because reality is not determined. Reality is not undetermined. And this is what Reverend Master, as you know, has said for many, many years, that reality itself is its own sufficiency. And even sitting here and being harangued by thoughts and feelings is in its own way sufficient, if we begin to really sit still within the arisings of those things and be willing to let the seeing be the seeing. So Achalanatha and awareness, if you like, are very, very, very at the heart of this. Because once we begin to, as it were, allow body-mind to be able to experience anything that comes into the, or say quite a lot of things that come into our field of experience, we are able gradually to see that we're not bound by what we experience, whether that be our self-image or whatever may appear out in experience in the world or wherever. Easy to say that, and I'm not saying I've found that, but I can well see that just simply sitting and getting perhaps bored to tears or frustrated or thinking it's not going well or it is going well, or where am I going, I'm lost, I'm found, it's good, it's bad. All of that is as nothing, because it is nothing. It has nothing, and it knows really nothing. It jabbers away, and it comments on everybody and everything, and jabber, jabber, jabber. And it's jabbering away because it is absolutely scared of its own non-existence, because it still thinks things exist and things don't exist, and it doesn't want its own annihilation. And we're all in that boat, all of us together. Absolutely. If someone comes in with a gun now, we'll all be up at the wall with our hands up, probably, because we do not want to die. We have a strong feeling of that. And yet we have these pointers in our tradition that show that, wait, look, birth and death are not what you think they are. You've lived a dream, you're living a dream. I'm not saying we get out of the dream, but we know on some level that, in a sense, we can, like Achalanatha, dare I say it, wear that dreadful garland of skulls, because he plays with death like a little toy, tossing it in the air, stringing it round his neck, the skulls. It's a terrible image, but it arrests us. It arrests us. That's what this war can do, and it's only worth it if it does that for all of us.